The 8th Canadian federal elections were held on June the 23rd, 1896. As I mentioned in the previous video, there had been a succession of prime ministers, conservative Canadian prime ministers, since John A. Macdonald had passed away in June 1891. First, John Abbott, then John Thompson, and John Thompson became the second Canadian prime minister to die in office. Then Mackenzie Bowell, and then only a few months before, or less than 2 months before the election, Charles Tupper, one of the fathers of the Canadian Confederation. Needless to say, the Conservative Party was in disarray, and since the hanging of Louis Riel, a partly French, partly Aboriginal or Métis political and social leader, although unfortunately also a mentally unbalanced man, since his hanging in 1885, the Conservatives had become profoundly unpopular in Quebec, to the benefit of the Liberals, and besides, the Liberals had their first French-Canadian leader, Wilfrid Laurier, who seemed young and dynamic in contrast to the old Charles Tupper. Although Laurier wasn't in years that young, he was about 55 years old, but compared to Tupper, he still was. The Liberals, ironically, did not win a plurality of the popular vote. However, the votes were distributed much more favorably for them than for the Conservatives, and the sizes of the constituencies were by no means equal in terms of the number of eligible voters. Therefore, with 41.4% of the vote, or about 401,000, they were able to win a majority, 117 seats out of 213, while the Conservatives, who did get 48.2% of the vote, or 467,000, only secured 86 seats. The voter turnout rose to 72.9%. Of the 86 Conservative parliamentarians, 15 identified as Liberal Conservatives. The Nationalists received 1.5% of the vote, or 14,000. The Independent Conservatives received 4 seats, or 1.3% of the votes, meaning 12,000 approximately. The Patrons of Industry Party or Group ran 31 candidates who received a total of about 38,000 votes, or 3.9%, but only 2 of them were elected. The McCarthyite faction or party or movement ran 11 candidates who received a total of about 13,000 votes, or 1.3%, but just 2 of them were elected. 18 independent candidates who garnered a total of about 14,000 votes, or 1.4% of the total, ran in this election. Only 1 was elected. 1 independent Liberal was elected with about 2,400 votes, or 0.2% of the total. There was 1 politically unknown candidate who received 1,600 votes approximately, or 0.2% of the total, but wasn't elected. 5 Protestant protective candidates ran, receiving a total of about 6,000 votes, or 0.6% of the total, but none of them were elected. And so began the 15-year prime ministership of Wilfrid Laurier.